All right, so I wanted to talk about the divine masculine and the divine feminine, and also love. So, beginning with the union of these polarities, the easiest place to start is with love in the heart of humanity as it manifests in this culture, right? So there are two ways to talk about love, which is love and unconditional love. And the thing that people don't understand, I think, is that when we say what love is to us, that means, love in the broad sense. That is supposed to be unconditional love. But being in love, love for your children, for example, is supposed to be unconditional love. Love for your fellow men, ideally, is unconditional love. Because unconditional love is something that is not restrained by your ego. It's not something where you're withholding some portion of love from somebody because you have an internal prejudice toward them, an internal bias toward their expression in society. Because you would prefer to hate them, essentially, right? Or you would prefer to be afraid of them. Instead of pitying them or caring for them, right? Because pity is, it's like kind of a low form of emotion, but it's a little higher than being afraid of somebody. Anyway, but to bring this back to where I was starting, when we say love, we mean unconditional love. But being in love with somebody is highly conditional, and it's supposed to be. I mean, I could say supposed to be. What I mean by it's supposed to be is it's personal. You can be somebody who loves pretty freely, Doesn't matter to you who you love. You've got an open heart. You're like Dionysus, just the spirit of nature and the world and the festival of life, the festival that is light, the festival of light that is life, right? If you're in that mode of vibration, if you're in touch with the spirits, essentially in the land, in the world, in revelry, in celebration, in the spirits of the spirits, like you like to drink with friends and be lost in that moment and get in touch with that looseness that is so difficult to find in human society sometimes because we are so rigid in our ways of thinking, in our mores, in our structures socially, and with good reason. Like it makes sense a lot of the times, the rules that we have, like we've collectively decided on, because they are what work for people. They're what keep things together. And they're what keep everybody getting along, since they can't do that on their own terms, of their own accord. Like if they were just left to say what they really think about everything, how they really feel about everything, everybody would be upset. You can't have everybody upset all the time. There's work that needs to be done. Things need to happen. The gears of the society need to turn so that people can eat and live in a box and like have kids and play video games or whatever it is. So you do all the things that you need to do. So that might be you, is that you have this free way of loving, which is very valuable. Like that's a great thing in society. But another thing that exists too, that a lot of people are very uncomfortable with, is that love is very personal. And you can be very, very specific about what love is to you. You may not even know what love is to you, because it's something that just has to happen, It's just, you have to experience that love at first sight. You have to experience that moment where you go, I was in this world where I was not in love, and then I saw this person, and like that, instantaneously my whole world changed and I was in love. I mean, there are people who will tell you who you should love, essentially, which is insane. Like that is an insane thing to tell somebody, you know? Let me put it differently. It's an insane thing to tell somebody who to be in love with. And that's what people mean when they say who to love, because there aren't that many people going around saying you should love everyone. They have a lot of different people have their way of saying that. The Christians go like Jesus taught to love everybody. But they don't really love everyone. Some Christians do. Those are the true Christians, the ones who love everyone. Those are true Christians. But there are plenty of Christians whose love is highly conditional, and loving for them, and this is a characteristic of a lot of people, loving for them means telling people that there is one kind of love to express, and that's the only real valid form of love. And in fact, that's what a lot of people gravitate toward, because what they're doing is they're taking their own version of love and they are projecting it onto the world, and they're saying this is the way to be and this is the way to love. And part of that comes from love, but part of it comes from fear too, because they are afraid that they have not found the way to love. Well, let me think. I mean, more than that, like they do think they've found the way to love, but they're afraid of the idea that there are other ways to love, because it seems like it would invalidate their way of loving and their way of connecting and communicating. And so to bring this back to the concepts of the divine masculine and the divine feminine energies, if we're like parceling out love and how love works and what we can give to society and what we hold for ourselves in such a way that we're not necessarily seeing everybody in society as having valid love, as long as it's love to them, as long as they look at themselves and they go, yeah, this love that I have is love, then we're out of touch with the divine masculine and the divine feminine energies, in the sense that those energies are just what is at the base of all kinds of love. Every kind of love has some piece of those. Now, there are things that people call love that it's like not love. Like there's mental illness where people think that they have love for somebody else, but what they have is mental illness. Like pedophilia or something like that. That is not love. But there are people who have like fixations as well. They go, oh, I love this superstar, this person, and I'm gonna stalk them now, like aggressively stalk them. and like that's a terrible thing. Like that's an awful, way to be or person to be in many respects. But what it is reflective of is that at the core of love is an identification of the other as your heart, as your expression of self. And that is what is in conflict and what is out of touch with the energies of the divine masculine and the divine feminine. Until you get all the way down to what they really are, which is the understanding that we're all one and everything is contained within itself and we are all contained within each other. And when you get down to that understanding, then what love is to two people coming from that place is a recognition of self in other, where the other is in such a different time and place that they have taken on a completely different mode of processing the world's energies. And so instead of being the same person as you, now they form a complement to you. Like the male in that sense, the male and the female in that sense are really not so different, but if you do pull the natural sort of earth energy out of it, then the male is sort of a sheltering energy, like the body, the head, the physical body, the mind, which carries the heart through the world. It is a sheltering energy for the energy of the heart to exist within, so that the heart can be free to feel everything it feels. Because the divine feminine is about feeling freely, completely, everything with abandon, essentially. And when you feel that way, you're extremely vulnerable, because you've opened yourself up completely to the energies of the world. And it's a form of destruction. It is destruction through the heart, through the feelings, through the self, through everything that is you. You are destroyed in the female. And there's a safe way to express that energy. But you do it within, really, as the divine feminine expression. You, in a sense, are so lost in that experience of feeling that it's like being in a hurricane, and you are the eye of the storm, but not really. You're in that storm, right? And you don't even recognize the other person with you. Time and space, like, essentially become extremely undifferentiated. You're lost in that moment, in that abandon, in that bliss, which can, up to that point of being able to be expressed truly as love, be expressed as a tremendous amount of suffering. And so that's how, people on their paths through the world are manifesting the divine masculine and the divine feminine energies. A lot of them are not there. Most of them are not there. Maybe no one's there. I don't know. But that would be maybe like the representations of gods, throughout history. It's like a god like Dionysus or something like that, right? It's here's a person who represents the integration of these energies, where this person, Dionysus, can be with the energies that represent the chaos and the life and the way these things come together as this beautiful harmony. But there is a sense of being lost in it, and that's what the alcohol in that sense represents, is you lose yourself in the energy. And for a lot of people, getting lost in an energy means getting destroyed. It's like being a ship that gets in a hurricane, gets shipwrecked, right? But once you've integrated a lot of those energies, then getting lost in an energy doesn't mean getting destroyed anymore. It just means being lost. It's the difference between like falling while you're falling from a plane with a parachute and falling to your death, right? So then what the masculine energy represents, because you have to understand, with the divine masculine and the divine feminine, they're integrated. It's two people get lost in each other. That's the idea with those energies when they meet. When they don't meet, then there is a separation of them, which is that you can go into that state of being lost. And you can also go into the state of having a kind of domain in that sense, and this is the more masculine energy, is just coming into awareness of what your circumstances are and what your reality is, and the interactions in that reality that are meaningful to you and important to you. You take stock of things, you take account of things, you look at it on its own terms. But what's sort of funny about the divine masculine in this sense is that it almost doesn't even really exist. At the emotional level, there's sort of just the divine feminine. It's about getting lost in that energy of the moment and of all of the energies leading up to it. Like, that's why, because like the thing with what builds up to the divine masculine is all of the circumstances of death that you encounter throughout life. It is overcoming death that requires that energy, but where it gets you is to the feminine, is to the female. And this is not expressed like overtly necessarily in the way that people think about that. But what I mean is that you control the chaos in the sense that you learn to live in the chaos, learn to manage it. Being in the chaos and being one with the chaos and not having it destroy you is the feminine. Being capable of having that chaos be there and not having it, like really being the eye of the storm, is more the masculine energy. But it's as you can see from this, these are just different modes. It's not really related to one person or another person necessarily, until you do get into gender. Like, as far as I can tell, it's very, very hard for me to imagine how it could not be this way. But this does seem to be like a male-female thing, the way that these are oriented toward each other, because like the female form and expression is the way that it interacts with the male psyche is such that it has a very calming sort of effect and influence. It is appeasing in the sense of being like mollifying to the harshness of the male energies and the male instincts. And then even if you don't have that harshness, there's still that desire that you have, where you look at somebody else and you go, she represents what is inaccessible in my heart without her. And I recognize there's a quality of that from female to male as well. But with a man, the difference, I think, is that you can completely be lacking that in its entirety. You can have no real ability to connect whatsoever from a heart energy. You can have all of the foundation of a heart energy for connection so that you can connect. But this is where women typically have that foundation all the time. They always have some degree of ability to connect from the very core of their heart to everyone around them. Not all women, and a lot of people become jaded and unable to connect for a variety of reasons. And that's why, people can feel bitter, for example, but even if they're still able to connect from their heart, because for women, I think if you're coming from a place of being able to connect from your heart and you're going around connecting from your heart to everybody, and then somebody does something to hurt you in that way, it's very painful because you're coming from your heart, and it's like, why didn't they come from their heart with you? Especially with parents and stuff like that. If somebody really, really hurts you in your life, and with men, men in society, at least 20, 30 years ago, were definitely raised to deal with adversity more. You could be your father's favorite. It's the dad has the son that he just, everything that son does is prized and cherished. Damn, he loves his son completely. It doesn't matter how much of a little shit his son is, basically, right? He's like, oh no, it's Abdul's the best or whatever. It doesn't matter what kind of stuff he does. The Saudi kind of that prince who he killed that guy, Khashoggi, whatever his name was. Here's this prince from this very royal bloodline, this family with lots of money, who's definitely was raised to be his father's prized son. You're gonna rule this country, right? And he just brutally murders this journalist. And then now he's just making deals with people in the world and is involved in world affairs and stuff. And everybody's going on it's all normal. And that's fine. That sort of thing is happening in the world. There's all sorts of stuff happening all the time. But the point that I'm making about that is that that's a person who was never really told that anything that he did could make him stop being his father's most prized kind of expression of his way of seeing all of his own value like reproduced in another human being. It's like, here's this other human being who reflects all of my pride, right? And so he passes that down to his son, and then you've got this son who just, he's so used to being seen that way that when he encounters the world, it's like that world is not going to see him the way his father did. And he might have even disappointed his father at some point. He probably did. And so you end up, maybe he partied too much, or maybe he just did something that his father didn't want him to do, because our natural sort of instincts is we try to fill the space that we're raised into. We try to express fully everything we have. So if we have lots of money, it's like you just want to make all the choices that you can and take all the options that are in front of you, right? So the thing about that, I lost my train of thought. I was saying something about why it was important that he was raised that way. But maybe it'll come back to me. So the thing about these energies is that when you're coming from a place like that of assurance and knowing who you are and being who you are without necessarily having total real regard for other people, that kind of person, who they will have regard for, what will bring them to heal, essentially, is somebody who's a fulfillment of the love that they're trying to express and experience in the world. Because the point of things can easily become someone like that, And so there are a lot of men who are geared to be quite selfish, fundamentally, the way that they interact with the world. They make it all about themselves, because the male energy is oriented toward dealing with the world in all of its vicissitudes, in all of its destruction, right? And they even like destruction. So they get in the UFC and they get in a ring and they, beat the shit out of each other. And someone like me comes along and watches that, and I'm just like, I remember the first time I saw the UFC. I don't watch the UFC, but the first time I saw it, I was like, this is gonna be stupid for sure. I was like, this is gonna be a waste of time. It's gonna be very dumb. But I watched it, and just these guys just wailing on each other, and then there was blood everywhere, and I was just like, whoa, this is cool. These people are beating the hell out of each other. And then years later, you learn about CTE and stuff like that, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. I don't know. I don't know what the words mean, but it's basically brain damage, right? What football players get. And as soon as you learn that everybody who's in the ring is just building up brain damage, and their ears are getting all fucked up, it's cauliflower ear and shit, You're looking at these people and you're going, that kind of sucks, that's not as entertaining as it was, before, when I thought that, they'd get knocked around, but then they'd heal up, they'd basically be fine. But no, they're going to go through the rest of their life, with difficulty doing basic mental things for various reasons, and it's going to affect them in their lives. And so knowing that, I'd rather watch, martial arts or something, or some kind of sport that's not, video games or something where people aren't getting hurt by it. But that's just me. And then now, the more that I think about it, the more that I say that, it's well, if they're going to get in the ring and do it anyway, if I see it, there's something primal about it, It's just just beat the crap out of each other. And so that's why men are drawn to those kinds of activities. And what women are drawn to in that is a projection of their own energy in a certain level, which is because women are physically, smaller than men. A woman can definitely be just as world forward as a man. She can stand up there, she can face the world just as much as a man. But there is, if a woman is falling into her heart as her natural state, and like that's where she lives and that's where she wants to be, heart-centered activities usually don't go in that direction. But there is like a genetic understanding from living on the earth that comes with the reality that surviving the circumstances of the earth often involves taking those circumstances head on. And over the course of human history, what men are protecting women from is always men, basically. Like that's why like the gender wars are stupid. Like it's like, let's divide people into these two camps. Who's better, who's worse? Well, like, okay, so sure, like men create the problems, right? But not the men who are trying to fix those problems. That's an entirely different class of man. That's an entirely different class of person. Those are peace-loving people who are trying to stop the people who want to hurt everybody else from hurting everybody else. And, generally, women are not the people out on some rampage trying to hurt everybody else. They do exist, of course. Like, everybody exists somewhere on the planet. That's the other stupid thing about making generalizations. Or it's like, this so-and-so doesn't exist. So-and-so does exist. Whoever you're thinking of, that person exists somewhere. Which is a fun exercise, really, if you get into it. And that's the masquerade. That's the show. That's the, I don't know what the term for it would be. It's like a circus of light, essentially, right? Light and dark. That everybody exists somewhere, in some context, in some capacity. And so this is why I was talking about Dionysus earlier, is if you really get into the energy of what Dionysus is all about, then you are watching the masquerade and you are reveling in it. You are enjoying it to the absolute fullest extreme of all of the fucking weird shit on the planet, of how extreme everything is, of how chaotic people are. Because there's no chaos like built into the system, meaning that no chaos has to be there. Chaos is a choice. People produce chaos. It's not a choice to experience it, sort of. I mean, but like the way that would be is, if you look at it from the perspective of the soul, the reason there is not a choice to experience chaos from that perspective is that it's too magnetic, it's too interesting, it's too transcendental. It's something that is too much of a drive for your interest. You're like, I really want to experience that. And so you go and experience it. Once you're here, though, then we can talk about things at the level of the choices that people are making. And yeah, people can force things on you. That is absolutely something that can happen and does happen. But it is forced on you. If you talk about it through spiritual modalities, it's forced on you through your fears. Otherwise, there would really be no way for the sum total of the universe to adjust to who you are in every given moment. And so if you understand that everything in reality, like there's not one universe that we live in. It's a very fluid state. Everything is very fluid. Everything is responding to you all the time. The reason it doesn't respond to victims as a general sort of reality is because we have been raised on this planet. Like, you have to remember, it's a billions of years old planet. Like, there were dinosaurs and the Ice Age and countless wars and countless different genetic lines running through, lizards and horses and dolphins and birds and bears and and wolves and large cats and thousands of countless kinds of microbial things and insects and just the trillions and trillions and trillions of ants, or however many ants there are on the planet. It's like an insane amount of ants. Who has any idea how many ants or termites or things there are, right? And we've all developed together in this big pool, this big genetic pot. And people can have influences from all of these genetic lines somewhere in them. So what you have to realize is each person, whatever a person looks like, they're still carrying the planet's energy, but they're also carrying the energy of the soul too. The energy of the planet is like survival energy. It's like life and death, but the energy of the soul is a healed energy that you can always return to through yourself. And since the whole point of all of this is to balance those two energies, when you do return to it, then the world reflects that. It's just that to return to that healed state, to express that energy, doesn't necessarily mean that you can't still engage with things that people would consider adverse. You can be like the total guru, right? And then walk out into the street and get hit by a car if you like. In a sense, that's what Jesus did, right? Here was this guy where, the Bible describes him numerous times as like the crowds are coming to get him, and then Jesus slipped away, right? He goes home at the beginning of I think John, or maybe it was Luke. He goes home at the beginning of Luke, and he's talking to the people in his village, and they're like, wow, Jesus, you really know a lot. And then he says something to offend them, and so they take him up to the top of a hill to throw him off to his death, and it just says he slipped away, right? And then, he goes and he gives a talk to a crowd, and they listen to what he says, and they go, Jesus, we don't like what you said. They go, wow, you did some miracles, that was amazing. And then he says things that offend them, and then they try to kill him again. It says he slipped away. And then at the very end of the story, of course, he doesn't slip away. He doesn't try to. He doesn't have that purpose. Pontius Pilate even essentially tells him that he'll let him go. He's like, you haven't done anything. Nothing to offend me anyway. The Jews want you killed because you called yourself king. And so they're saying that based on Caesar's laws, that means that you should die because nobody's allowed to call themselves king except for Caesar. But then Pontius Pilate is like, well, obviously, that's not what you mean. So they write King of the Jews under him on the cross when they nail him to the cross and put him up in front of Jerusalem. And it's a joke. It's the Romans just being incredibly sardonic, and it's actually very funny. It's a very funny scenario. And I think Jesus, he tells Pontius Pilate that he doesn't really care. He's like, it's of as little concern to him as it is to Pontius Pilate. It's just something that the Jews want, and he lets it happen because that's his pact, essentially. And so he says, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? And what he's saying really, in a sense, manifestationally, is that that's the expression of the energy when you really don't deserve to have anything happen to you. And yet here you are with that energy. That's all it is. It's not even saying that he was thrust into that position without choice. In a certain sense, though, he was, by that same spiritual energy that brings a spirit to this planet in the first place, where you go, I'm just too curious. I'm just too curious. And you can look at existence and go, why does it have to be this way? Why does existence have to be like this? Why can't you just get everything that you could possibly hope and dream for from existence without needing to step your toe in the waters of suffering? And that's where the masculine energy comes in. That's where the male comes in. That's where the divine masculine enters into the picture, because what it is it is courage, fundamentally. Anybody who is expressing courage, true courage, well, any courage really, I mean, it's like all courage is going to contain a piece of true courage. That's what's good about it, because all courage by definition is you facing something that is a challenge for you and that is imposing. It could even be you're just like some, severely introverted person, and you're just on your computer all the time, and you're with the things that you're comfortable with, and you never leave your house. And so one day you leave your house and you go outside, and the big world is out there, and you see it, and you're with it, and you maybe even talk to a person, and it's like this huge event in your life. You're like, I did it. I encountered my fears. I was courageous. Even little courage like that has a piece of the greatest courage, It's all about, because you can't really encounter something that you are not disposed to handle on some level. If you can't handle it at all, it will destroy you. So no matter how courageous somebody is, they have the pieces in order to be able to be that courageous in that moment. And that's sort of like the semi-paradoxical thing, is that everybody has those pieces if they're willing to access them. And there are a lot of people who are not courageous, and they masquerade as having courage on the planet. Like there's a thing where men go, they're like, it's my way or the highway, or like, you've offended my honor, and they think that is like standing up and being a man. But being a man is not getting offended by stupid things, and not like being wrapped around the world's fingers so that it can just do whatever it wants with you. If somebody comes up who knows how to push your buttons, and it's like, oh, I'm just gonna let them push my buttons, and that's because I'm a man, so now they've gotten me angry, I'm gonna beat them up because they made me do it, which is just like incredibly silly. It's like extremely silly and pointless. So it's all about courage, though, fundamentally. You can more or less equate masculinity with courage, but what creates the masculine energy that people can witness in front of them is having expressed that courage. And since this is in your genes, it's in your genetic, it's in your blood over millennia, you don't necessarily need to encounter those scenarios in life. You can be somebody with a natural, inherent kind of courage who's very ready to face any number of circumstances. And society has given them sort of the archetypal components of that, so that they know who they'll be in those situations. But there's a sort of a counterpart to courage, which is the understanding that you don't need courage. Because a person with no courage can still be thrust into like basically any situation. And you could say that forces them to access their courage, but it can also essentially break them off from themselves because of how overwhelming the circumstances are. And so if a person is in that state, that is the reflection of the divine feminine at its core, is separating self from the circumstances to the point that you are lost in the circumstances and you've forgotten yourself, and you're shutting out the circumstances and trying to hide in yourself, but you can't. That's a very low form of that energy, though. It's like, that's the introduction to what the feminine energy is that you don't have the components in that moment to rationalize things, to use rationality, to settle the tempest that's like hit you in your life, and be with it and face it and deal with it. And so this is the fundamental kind of like rising, falling motion, the give and the take, is that you enter into the feminine energy, the divine feminine, by breaking away from yourself, and then you coalesce that energy. you come to know it, and then that's when you're expressing the divine masculine. But to go back into the divine feminine, you just turn off your mind. You go into a flow state. You're being with things. You're acting as if the world is, it's as if it's a tempest that's pushing you this way and that way, and you have no separate self, and you're swept up in the circumstances. And then that's where, like, love comes in, is that love is meant to reflect that pattern and that path. Because what is love supposed to be in its idealized state? Is it's a force that sweeps into your life and takes you off your feet from the viewpoint of the feminine energy. And from the viewpoint of the masculine energy, it is that, but it just happens in the heart, and it's sort of contained there. It's isolated there, and it doesn't really leave the heart. The outside external aspect of you is steady and stable, and is it's structured. So this is why these two energies can't happen at the same time, is that the masculine is just too structured to be able to be unstructured, and the feminine needs to be unstructured to be able to express itself in that raw form, but it has to express its unstructuredness within structure, or it will get lost completely. So yeah, like, that's the essential quality of those two things. And so this is why the feminine energies outside of the relationship kind of love are drawn into things that are stable and heart fulfilling. Like, you come into a room and it has plants and color and, light, and it's clean, and these things are important, is because all of that reflects stability, the stability of flow. It is flow that is always present. And so that is a healing kind of energy to have around, where the masculine doesn't really need that so much, because if you're truly in the masculine, you're so centered in yourself, in what self is, that the environment is not that important. It's sort of like being in jail or being on a boat, like one of those slave boats. Like, you're rowing, you're in jail, you're in the filth, you're in the muck, you're in the jungle and war, right? Things are falling apart. All you have is, like, your comrades, everybody else who's just in it with you, who's on the same level with you. That is what you need. Like, that's why fraternity is so important to a lot of men. Brotherhood, in these things, where it's like sisterhood, that's more of a fun thing, right? Like if you're really sisters with somebody, you're just sharing from love, right? If you're men, a big part of brotherhood can be, like, not letting each other slip too much, not letting each other fall too much into bad habits and like being weak, essentially, right? And now that's a good brother who's standing there by his brothers, and he's guiding them and directing them, isn't letting them get away with their crap, basically, right? And and so that doesn't always exist everywhere, because a lot of people don't really care about each other like that. It's probably a fairly rare thing to be able to be that honest. And, like, male honesty is a very, I think, important thing, because it's about just unveiling the whole psyche, letting it all fall and all of it hang out, essentially, because the male psyche is kind of a threatening thing. It's sort of a terrifying thing. like if you get down to what it is, how men think, how they feel, it's very easy as a man to, like, just to look at the world as an avenue to all the experiences you want to have, as an avenue to all the possessions you want. Like, it's really not that bad of an analogy when you're looking at the development of male, like, love psychology, to look at young men especially. I mean, maybe not now. I think people are different now. I don't know what the hell is going on with people now. But at least, for a time when there are people like this in the world, it's like if you look at men in high school or something, and maybe around the world, I don't know, it's still like this, because in America, like, things are weird. But I don't mean weird in a bad way. I just mean, like, I had somebody get mad at me because I was like, men and women are different. And she was like, no, they're not. I can't have this conversation with you. It's making me uncomfortable. And I was just like, well, what the hell? you know? Men and women are different. Like, there are women who are like men, but you say they're like men because generally men are that way. And there are men who are like women, and it's okay for them to be that way, but you say, hey, they're like women because generally women are that way. It's just a general thing. Like, it's just easier to fall into a heart energy as a woman, and it's just easier to be like a selfish, egotistical dickhead as a guy. That's how you're kind of primed, and that's what I mean. Is that as a man, you are able to look at women kind of the way you look at a car. You're in high school. You're like, I really want like a Firebird or whatever. I don't know what the fuck people like the cars and shit, but you're like, I want this car, and I want that would make me happy. It's got a big engine and it makes me happy. And then you see a woman and you're like, oh, well, I want that in my life too, because it also makes me feel good. And it is a possession in that sense. Like, you're not like, I want to connect to this person as a person. Because the only people you really want to connect to are your bros. You just want to connect to the people who think the way that you do, who get you, who understand you. And if you're looking for a woman, you're like, are you even going to be able, capable of really enjoying talking to her? Or are you going to be compromising some part of your own mind to be able to do that, some part of your own truth? And that's where, like, people, you'll see that in the world, that, like, men will give up a part of themselves to be with a woman. And what happens with women is that women will endure intolerable circumstances in order to be with a man. But, it's like, if men were really truly honest with women, like, that's sort of the unfortunate thing, is that then they would be like, okay, well, yeah, like, I find all sorts of women attractive. I can't really not. It's very hard not to, because as a man, you're going through your life, like, when women are children, like, they're a lot more predisposed to be thinking about love. They're watching the Disney films. They're fantasizing about marrying the prince later. And there are a lot of women nowadays who'd find it incredibly offensive that I just said that, which is insane to me. But, so yes, women are insane. No, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. Calm down, women. No. Also a joke. I just wish everybody would, like, lighten up a bit. But, because just like when I was a kid, I was a little boy, I played with dolls, I watched Disney movies, I was like, oh, I wanted to be Aladdin, I thought that would be really cool, and my favorite Disney princess was probably Belle, or Ariel. I liked Ariel a lot, as well, and I thought Snow White was very pretty. Like, I had lots of, like, crushes on women when I was a kid. But at least when I was a kid, that sort of thing was pretty discouraged, It was like, you're not supposed to feel that way. Because I'm 37, so, like, as a child, growing up in the 90s, like I wanted, like, a little house. Like, they had these doll houses you could have, like a big house you could kind of go in, as a kid. And I wanted one of those. I was like, it'd be cool to have my own little house. And my grandparents usually would, like, get me all the stuff that I wanted. But the two things I never got, even though I liked John Wayne movies and cowboys and stuff, and I was like, he's on a horse, but people are like, horses are for girls. I never got to ride a horse, and I never got to get one of those little dollhouse things to live in as a kid. So, like, that was my personal, I looked at that later and I was just like, somebody didn't want me to grow up to be gay. I think that's what was going on there. I think my grandfather probably was like, this kid, I don't know what's up with him, but I don't want to encourage this. And it's like, yeah, that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that people have thought that way historically. Um, but the thing that I'm getting at is that typically, for girls, like, what kind of things were girls doing when I was a kid? They were like playing house, having tea parties, sitting with dolls, having like imaginary conversations with these friendly animals, and like playing dress up and these kinds of things. What were little boys doing? You were sitting there like playing with army soldiers, going, this one's so cool, and he like kills this one, and his head explodes and there's blood everywhere, and they're all the army soldiers are hanging out, then everybody dies, and it's like, that's how you're thinking from a very young age. And you're going through life this way as a young boy. You're playing all of these games like this, and you're like, oh, girls have cooties, girls are gross. I mean, I didn't so much, because I had like a female cousin. I had female friends when I was very young. Some of my very first friends were female, and so like having little girl friends, I think it was like sort of a beneficent energy being with them. There was something that was very calming about it to my spirit. And then I'd be with my male friends, and they were just foul-mouthed and crude. Like, I'm talking like 5 years old, swearing, like talking about vulgar sexual things that they'd heard about from their brothers and stuff like that. There was a kid who asked me, he was like riding by on his bike, and he goes, I'm so fast on this bike, nobody can hit me. Like, yeah, try and hit me with a rock, like, you can't take me down. And I hit him square in the head with a rock and like knocked him off. And he was not happy about that, and his mom was not happy about that. But he'd asked me to do it, and so it wasn't a big deal. But that was the kind of mindset. You're playing cops and robbers and stuff. And so when you hit high school, like, that kind of attitude never goes away. I was a kid. I was doing that when I was like 5 years old. Then when I was 7, I'm playing video games. I'm 12. I'm like playing the game where you're, like, one of my favorite games was called Perfect Dark. You're a secret agent. It starts, you land in a helicopter on top of a building, and then you have to go down through the whole building, like shooting everybody. And like looking back on it, it's kind of horrifying on a certain level, because like that has to be able to make sense to your psyche. You have to understand the purpose of why characters like James Bond exist. It's because the world is like full of villainy, obviously, and there's a part of the child psychology that can definitely grasp that. But it's very easy to slide into a space too where you're just going, I'm always right, I'm always the good guy. And when I'm stopping the bad guy, like, it's an expression of my own efficacy, my own capacity to take action and thwart evil, right? And you're not really thinking, like, there are gray areas to all of this. Things are never cut and dry like that in the world for the most part. And so on some level in your mind, it just sinks in that, like, shooting people and seeing blood and like solving problems that way is gratifying. It's like, you're like, maybe someday I'll be a secret agent. Maybe someday I'll join the military. And, it's like, there are a lot of bad people in the world. There are a lot of really evil, fucking awful people, for sure. There are terrible, terrible people on the planet. And so there is a need for people throughout history to have been able to stand up, to have been able to be courageous, and to go do really, really dangerous things that require a high degree of skill and efficacy to perform. And that's male and female. Like, that's the thing. Like, everything I'm talking about is not specifically gendered. not truly. Like there's a weight, there's a bias, this way or that way, because the earth is designed like that, essentially. It's like our social systems over the last few thousand years, which is really not a long time, by the way. The earth, like human history, has not been around very long. The amount of stuff that it's done is tremendous. That's why time feels so long. That's why 150 years ago feels like a whole different, frame of reference to the entirety of reality, is because it is. But 150 years is no time at all. 200 years is no time at all. 2,000 years is no time at all. 10,000 years, that's a little longer, but it's still fundamentally like the planet, it's millions and millions of years of evolution. The planet's been around for billions of years. So it's really nothing. But the people who express that efficacy in those situations and express that courage and go do those things, they accept the call of duty, right? That's one of my favorite games. So, like, there's something so inherently compelling about that, which is that when you do, like, accept that call of duty and you use everything you have to accomplish an objective, there is a flow state in that. You get lost in that. You're completely present with what you're doing and the gravity of it and the enormity of it and the meaning of it and everything that can be lost at every given moment, right? Like if you're a secret agent, if you're a spy, I mean, oh my God, the stress, imagine that. Like they can't be stressed. They have to be totally present. You're behind enemy lines all the time. You're trying to get information to slip out from behind. The enemy does not want, like, and I say the enemy, and that's where things get like fuzzy again, is because everybody, like, we're all people, right? Nobody is the enemy in a sense. But the way that they are the enemy is that you're over there, you're in their backyard, you're in their shit, and you're doing stuff that they do not want you to do. You're doing it for, like, the security of your nation, the security of your people. You're doing it because to you, they represent threat to the whole world. And you're there, and you're probably some kind of an adrenaline junkie. You get a little bit of a high from being in dangerous situations because you're capable of dealing with that. So you're back there, you're behind. So this is why I'm saying it's enemy lines, because if they find you doing that, they're going to kill you, and they're not going to do it slowly. They're not going to do it quickly. They're going to do it slowly. They're not going to make it easy on you. They're going to take joy in your destruction. And, like, that's what's going on the planet. And that's what is bringing up the divine masculine and the divine feminine energies for people to experience, is that level of destruction exists to be passed through. And so the point that I'm making about this, though, is when you get to the other side, that's when you get all the benefits of it. That's when you get that ability to be completely in the moment in those states. And then ultimately you can take that ability to be completely in the moment in those states, and you can be completely in the moment with the whole of your life. This happens over lifetimes. It's something that's in your genes. It's something that gets passed down through many, many experiences. But it comes back into your experience of love, back into your experience of the moment itself. But that is the masculine. That's what that is, because it's not about love, not really. It's about love in the sense that it's about protecting love, but the experience of being in those kinds of situations, in that kind of energy that calls for everything from you and does not have love present, is the masculine. Being willing to face that, being willing to stand up to it. And that's the irony of a lot of men who think they're really manly and stuff, is that they're not. They're really not. They're not manly because they're not willing to encounter situations that are not ideal to them on some level. And then they just force the world to be the thing that they want it to be and be the way that they want it to be. And they call that being manly, and they call it being ideal. And there are some women who respond to that, and like there's certain dynamics where people enjoy that too. Like they're like, oh, I like to be dominated or something like that. Or it's like, I like a strong man, like I don't like a weak man. But there is an understanding in that they're just finding him to be less bad than the other guy, really. And the man that a woman like that really, really, truly wants anyway is a guy who is strong, but who loves her, like completely, totally, with his whole heart, and with no reservations or separation between them. But in order to get a guy like that, like, she has to be a woman like that too. She has to be a woman who is capable of letting the boundaries dissolve completely and just being completely with a guy who is very strong in that way. And to do that, it's like she has to be with this whole psychology in a sense. Like he shouldn't really reveal his whole psychology to her. And this is what I was talking about earlier, though, is that it's like, the more male a guy is, like, the more likely, if he's really a strong person, like externally, the more likely that internally he's the only person in his world, in a sense. It's all about fulfilling his feelings. It's all about fulfilling his drive, his objectives, his desires, these things, right? And so even a guy who really truly loves a woman may still have in his psychology like a very, very heavy amount of love for other women. He's and this is what I was gonna say about high school. It's like you're a kid, you grow up, you're like playing soldier, you're shooting people, and then one day you're looking at girls and you're like, oh, whoa, like this is like this is doing stuff in my heart. That's interesting. Oh, that's like love, right? Like that's what people call love. And you just have this affection that comes through you for somebody, and you go, wow, like that's incredible. But there are a lot of men where it's like, there's not just going to be one person you feel that way about. There are a lot of beautiful women in the world. But there is something about just feeling that way for one person. You fall into that person, and you know that anybody else you fell into from your heart would kind of be the same thing, repeated. It would be the same energy and the same expression. And so from that point of view, you can say, I know that whoever I love, it is just one person in a sense. And so there's two ways of doing this. Each woman that you love is the same person in all these different forms. And that's the divine feminine, right? And the divine masculine interacting. But another way to do it is say, whoever I love her truly with my whole heart and I connect to her completely, that's the one. That's the love. And that's where a woman can reach back to that. And this is what a lot of men don't understand about women, is that women are totally disposed toward loving one guy. And what happens to that love, though, with those women a lot of the time, is that guy is not going to satisfy her on some level completely. Like there's just going to be something about him that's not everything she's looking for. Because he's not going to attain that level, because men do not come from the heart the way that women do. And for a woman to feel completely satisfied, she needs to be with somebody who's completely, I cannot say this enough, I cannot stress it enough, completely present with her. Who's just totally in love with her. Because that's what she's been waiting for. That's what she's been looking for. That's everything to her. It's like a guy training to be a soldier since he's like 7. He's like being indoctrinated by his nation and the culture and everything into being a killer. Except the thing that happens with women is that they've been training since they were like children, like to find the one, to be married, to be truly, truly in love, to be dedicated, to be all these things. But the thing about dedication is, while people can have like a psychological sort of like bent toward dedication, and so especially with women, then this is my perspective, of course. Like, men have an honor-based dedication toward women for sure, where you'll see men who are like just massive pieces of shit, basically, and they go, I love you, you're the one for me, and if a man threatens you, like, I'm gonna threaten him back because he's dishonored you. And then they turn around and they're with some other woman because they just, like, it doesn't mean that they don't still mean that and that they don't still get angry. It doesn't mean that they love her when he says he loves her, but what I mean is, like, he's still looking at her in like you could say possessive way, but what it really more is that he has that quality of relationship with her that is about dedication. He's not loyal to it. He's very loose with it. He's very capricious about his dedication. He's like, okay, I'm dedicated in moments where I'm feeling like horny or in love, or there's like a guy threatening you. Like, I'm dedicated in those moments. And the rest of the time, he's just like not thinking about her. He's doing other stuff. He's attracted to other women, wants to be with other women. But then some guy comes after the woman who's like, it's like, this is my woman. It's like, socially at that level, it's property, right? It's like, here, it's my property. But he's like, honor is like, I'm gonna protect my woman, right? I'm gonna stop her from you. Like, I'm gonna stop. And the irony there, of course, is like, you're gonna stop him from doing what? Like, causing her to be with him, like, by her choice. And now when that happens, when a woman does that, and it is her choice, and the guy gets angry about it, on a level it's not her choice, because that's the, that's the gearing of the feminine energy on that level, where I described it as a tempest, right? Is to be swept up in a circumstance or a situation. You're in the now. It's like God is coming to you, life is coming to you, everything is coming to you, and it's taking you somewhere you just can't resist. And then maybe you look back later, you're like, oh, I wish I hadn't gone down there, like that's just kind of the path you go down, but you get addicted to getting swept away, right? And so, like, that's where some very torrid, like, love stories and romances can come from. But again, the point that I'm making is that guy, when he's like, oh yeah, I am loyal to this relationship and you've dishonored this relationship, he's treating it as a relationship in that moment, but then he's acting aggressively, he's acting out against the other guy, and in reality there's really not much there. And so for women though, like, the thing is that they're geared to be dedicated, where they go, I'm all about you, and I'm gonna be all about you. And what a lot of times I wonder if women realize this, or if maybe this is an aspect of my psychology and just some men out there who have that masculine kind of energy. It's just very male, I would say. It's like about brotherhood. It's just like you're being bros. It's like the secret boys club that sometimes people would talk about. Like, I'd hear women go like, oh, I want to be a part of the men's club. Like, I don't, it's like they have this sort of secret connection to each other that I don't understand. And what that is it's a connection that comes from being a guy in this world, thinking the way a guy does, growing up the way that a guy does, where the way that your mind works and develops is like totally different from women. And I don't mean that in a good way. I don't mean it in a bad way either, but basically what happens is it's like you go through high school. I was gonna get to this earlier, sorry. But you go through high school, so you raised like a soldier guy, then you suddenly go, oh wow, I'm in love, right? And then what happens, I did get to this, but I'll phrase it the way I meant to, which is that then it's like you're walking into this garden and it's full of all these beautiful flowers that you didn't notice before. And you just want to pick all of them and love all of them and be with all of them. And it's like, that's the way that you're treating it internally. And the way a lot of men will express this is purely sexual. Like, they'll just be like, oh, that chick's so hot or whatever. Like, they get together and they talk and they're like, oh yeah, like like, I want to be with her, right? And they're like, oh yeah. And like everybody's sitting there like kind of agreeing, you know, like like there's not jealousy in that way. They're not fighting over that girl on that level. Like, it's not a contentious thing the way men can get with each other once someone's in a relationship and somebody else wants to be with their girlfriend or something like that. But otherwise, it's sort of, everything is seen kind of equally. Like, all women are seen as like an equal fantasy shared between all the men, the same as the fantasy of owning a car or fighting zombies in an apocalypse, or like, you know, going to war or whatever. Maybe this is because I grew up in a red state. I don't know. I grew up in Utah, so like, I grew up with Republicans, but I don't know. I mean, like, that's just, it's something that's always been a part of culture to some degree. It's always been there. But yeah, so you enter into this garden, you're there. And I think the thing with men is that what they do is the shared male psychology is, it's almost like you're one unit. You're like one person. Like, there's not really multiple men. There's just one man on a certain level, right? And like, that's how that's how men behave in war. It's like, you act together, you fight together, you die together, you don't leave anybody behind, you know? You treat each other as an extension of yourself. You don't behave selfishly. And the ones who do are cowards, right? And so everybody knows that. Everybody knows that archetype. And you have fraternity and brotherhood, and you stand with your brothers. But the thing is, like, if you really come from that place, you'll find that people won't really stand by you. Nobody really has your back to that level. There's a very few people who do, who are very, like, special, right? And so with women, though, this is what I meant to get back to, is that what they can do is their form of dedication. So while a guy has different kind of dedication, it's a little more object oriented. What women can do with dedication is they'll be like, I'm dedicated to this guy, but they also have this expectation, this built-in belief and understanding that he fulfills everything that they want. And they're like, he's what I was looking for. But then the veil comes down, and she finds out that everything she thought she wanted isn't necessarily what she wanted, because he'll do other things that she's not a huge fan of. Like, he'll think ways that she doesn't necessarily like, or he'll feel ways she doesn't necessarily like, that just rub her the wrong way for some reason. Or she'll meet a guy who fulfills her fantasies on a level she was not aware of. And of course, that can happen to men too, because of course there are many men who are just very dedicated and loving relationships. They probably had good childhoods, you know? They probably were raised by like decent people, like normal people. And so they ended up with a healthy psychology around the whole thing. And they might have similar feelings to what I just described. But I think that talking about it through the female perspective is pretty relevant, because women can really, really believe that the person that they're with, like that they're like, this is love, this is what it's all about, this is the point, and we're gonna get married, and this is like my dreams coming true. But then she finds that there was like a thing about love she didn't know. There was something about it that could call to her from places she'd never explored and never thought of. And so, like, this is why, for me personally, like, the way I've always been is I've been like, if I love somebody, the way that I love her is like, I just want her to follow her heart, essentially, right? If that's with somebody else, whatever it is, that's what I want. Now, that's sort of like an eternal way to look at things, because life is short, you know? Like, you get one life cycle on Earth from our perspectives, generally speaking. And when you have that life cycle, it involves probably just being with one person if it's gonna be like a pretty satisfying relationship. You can have a lot of relationships and have them be satisfying because everybody fulfills something different in you. But if you find the right person, then you get to go through all the cycles and phases of life with them. It's very hard because of finances and kids and all these things. Like if you kind of join your life to somebody and then they want to do something else, it can be pretty disruptive to your life. But I think like when you're younger, especially, I think it's good to not. I mean, at any age, it's not good to be possessive about love, and it's not good to feel entitled to somebody else's love. That'll generally stop them from loving you. And if they're the kind of person that doesn't, work that way with, where it's like if you're just a nice person and you're pretty cool and they don't like you for some reason, they want to be with somebody else, like that's probably a good thing. Like they should probably be with somebody else rather than you figure out how to like fit their psychology. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that about covers it, but I do want to say a note for like the idea of what happens ultimately is that you pass through those energies of love, you realize who you are. There's this apotheosis where there is an understanding, this is who I am, that I am not the search for love. I am not a person who needs somebody else. What I am is a person who is in a world that is full of all sorts of people. And the best thing that I can find in terms of a relationship is somebody who just fits into my heart, into my space, into my love, into my desires, and I fit into hers, right? From my perspective. And there is just a complete and total ease. Like your souls are completely at rest in that state. And then one last note for the individual to return to the beginning as well as the energy of Dionysus is that when you are in relationship with life, it is a state of revelry. It is a state of appreciation. It's a state of worship, in a sense. And it's a state of ego death, because if you really talk to life, if you really are present with it, it's unreal what it can produce. It uses its power to produce everything you see, and that's pretty nuts, right? Because you can love life and you can fear life. You're like, what's the Bible say? It's like God is a great and terrible God. I always thought that was kind of ridiculous, and like I've never, of course, believed that God, like at Sodom and Gomorrah, turned a woman into a pillar of salt or something like that. I don't think he was like if you're describing something that was really like that, you're not describing God, except in the sense of that God is everything. But the same thing that produces love produces fear. And it does so without any remark on it. God has no comment. God's indifferent in that sense, because existence just exists as all the things it can. It just is everything it is. That's pretty nuts. And like if you get down into what that is, it's like that will kill your ego. You can have no ego there. Because there will always be something supreme and unimaginable and so powerful, capable of producing everything. And it's the fact that it does produce everything and you see it all around you. That's what's so terrifying about it. But it's not, existence isn't sitting there going, I want to make this. We're going to put these people here and these ones here, and then they're going to fight and stuff, and it'll be really funny or whatever. It's just that it can and it does. And it doesn't do it to you. It doesn't do it to anyone. But it can produce those things, and it does produce those things. And if you're courageous enough, you can experience them, you can witness them, you can be with them. And then one day you'll fall back into the Dionysus energy where you withdraw from it. You go, I'm going to step off the stage of light and darkness, off the stage of light, fundamentally, which is what it is. It's a stage of light. I'm going to step off the stage, back into the forest, back in among the nymphs and the dyads and the forest creatures, the forest fauns, and the light and the spirit and the spirits and the joy and the revelry and the weirdness of it all, because it is all weird. It's so fucking weird. It's unimaginably weird. And so that's what you step back into, and you revel in the weirdness and the harmony and the joy and the love and all these things. But the reason it's Dionysus is because Dionysus is an earth energy, and the earth is very weird. It's not that weird, like cosmically, probably, like there's much weirder things, but it's also, it's like the extreme weird, depending on how you look at it and on how you get into it. So when you pull way back into that and you enjoy it, you enjoy the masquerade, you enjoy the show, you're a part of it and you're not. You're in it and you're not. And that is what brings you into, I would say, the complete sort of feminine and masculine energy. But then there's one more turn of that wheel, which is to withdraw even from that, because the weirdness does change to a degree when you hit a level of stability in consciousness and awareness about the nature of reality, because a lot of what I've been talking about is persona, it's personality, it's expression of an energy of creation in a space that allows a complete fulfillment of that expression, where there is this, you're taking a piece of the peace of God, like P-E-A-C-E, right? A piece of that peace, the stillness, the wholeness of God, and you're bringing it into the chaos of temporal reality and everything that it represents as threat, right? And you're keeping that peace there, and you're having it survive in that space, and that's a very beautiful thing. And that is a manifestation of both the divine masculine and the divine feminine together when you're doing that. And then so at some point you come back out of that. You return the peace of God to God as yourself. And then you're with all of the beings who have that energy and that understanding and that wisdom and that awareness. And that's a very full and very loving and very unified and very harmonious thing. And it's very beautiful and it's very expansive, and it is unimaginably majestic. I think that's something that it's very hard to express, and it's hard to comprehend the majesty of all of this. Like, if you can think of the worst things you can think of, there is a majestic corollary to that. And then the majesty beyond that is exponential, unimaginable. It's totally ineffable. And so there's that to look forward to as a spirit who has walked through the darkness, that's your actual soul, is something that is incomprehensibly beautiful and reframes all of the terror that I was just talking about. So, because all of that terror, when it is understood as a component of the expression of the emotional reality of the fulfillment, the harmony, the joy, the diversity of perspective in reality and everything that there is, then it all almost dissolves and disappears into that because it's so magnificent. It's so beautiful. And part of that is that, a big part of that, the whole thing really is just that beauty is you. So you could say all of this is you on the earth, but it's almost like you're trying to take a span of 10 seconds and to get somewhere, right? And this is like the first second. And when you're at the 10th second, the first second is just one of the 10 seconds that it took you to get somewhere. It's not different than that at all. It's just you spent that whole second like able to make that time seem like its own reality, its own thing, its own... This is very hard to describe. But essentially, the greatness of things so totally dwarfs. When I say you take that second that you're here, I literally mean it's the same as all the other 9 seconds. Even though you're only here for this second, and then there's 9 seconds in what you would call bliss, they're all the same kind of a second, is what I'm saying, from the perspective of when you arrive at the 10th second. There's not a difference between those things. It's all part of the same picture because it's all the richness of knowing everything that exists as a potential. It's like a movie in a library. Like, you watch a movie and you watch it as the person that you are. There's 2 ways you can watch a movie. You can watch it and be so completely engrossed in it and so completely involved in it. This works with reading a book too, right? You're so completely in the story that you feel it completely. You feel all of its characters and the expansiveness or the way it felt closed down and contracted and scary or whatever it is, right? Like, you feel it as if you're there, and that's how you get really into it. As if you are them and as if you have their feelings. But you can also do that from the perspective of not forgetting who you are, where you're not getting lost in it per se, because you're so aware of all the various stories that you never really lose your sense of self to that degree of like, I mean, I know this is very hard to describe because nobody really loses their sense of self that way. But what I mean is, it's like, if you're holding the greater picture all the time, when you get into these more condensed versions of that, the story itself is so valid and it's so worthy and it's so rich and it's so imaginative that you love all of the parts of it, even the parts that you're afraid of, even the parts that are difficult or terrifying. You love those too. And then when you incorporate it as a whole, you realize there are not actually separate stories. There is just imagination. There's just exploration. There is just you as this infinite thing. Infinite, unconfined, undefined. And it's your lack of definition that lets you be so many things. You can create in so many ways. And then there's this infinite creation to create back to you. And you are here, in a sense, without any purpose at all. In a sense, there was nothing here for you. like that's the interesting thing about it, is the majesty of everything is so majestic and it's so great that you are never without it. It's impossible to be without it. But having the experiences here does let you reintroduce yourself to that and experience it again from a new point of view, where these things seem so immediate and so all-consuming and so destructive and possessive and all these things, and you work out the ego and you go through all these different stages of having ego in various ways and seeing the world in all these different lights as a result, through judgment or through fear or through love, having to love when it was hard to love. And you go through all these states, and while you're here, it all seems so important and immediate. You can really beat yourself up for not being enough, for not being good enough in your own mind, for not being loving enough, for not being beautiful enough, for not being smart enough, whatever it is. And you're comparing yourself to society. You're thinking you've only got one life to live. But in reality, it's like you, the person you are, is just one thought that the true person that you are is having. You're just a passing fantasy on a warm summer day, under the trees or the clouds. You just went, just whipped through someone's mind. And that someone is the true you. That's who you are. And it is you too. It's somewhere in you. Like, that's the part of you that's always calling back to you. It's always calling you home to who you really are. And you often have to die to get there, like, because of the way that the physical sort of structure works. It's very hard to get to that state, like, especially within a human life, because a human life is not that long and people have a lot of trauma. It's like everybody has trauma. They just don't realize it because they've like compartmentalized it. But basically everybody who has a mind going on about stuff, like racing and thinking and doing all this stuff, that is a form of an expression of the collective trauma of humanity. It's also a form of expression of the collective genius of humanity too, which is to create a mind where we can confuse ourselves with the mind. We can think that we are the thoughts that are passing through our heads when we are not those thoughts. Like, you don't need to have thoughts to exist. That's just something that we tend to think, but we think that we're that pattern of thoughts. And to some degree, we know we're not, because we go, well, I don't want to think this way anymore. I don't want to feel that way anymore. And you don't want to be expressing things on that level anymore. But there are many people who never come to that place. It's just like they don't really experience this separation that's created in thinking, where they're judging or evaluating or criticizing or whatever it is. And it's a lot more natural to just let things be. And you just look at it. Because if you're not letting it be in your mind, you're clinging on to it, you're scrabbling after it, you're trying to get it, you're trying to do something with it. But in reality, that doesn't affect the thing. All you can do is express thoughts, express words, express feelings, take actions, right? And so I think that we get complexes because we're like, what actions do I take? What thoughts do I express? What feelings do I express in our pursuit of self? But really, when you get down to who you are, you'll find a space where you don't really feel like you have to do anything. You don't really feel like you have to be anyone. And from that space, it actually makes a lot more sense to make things easier for other people. You're like, oh, well, I'll be polite and respectful and reasonable, and I'll listen and be courteous. You might still express your perspective, though, because even though a lot of people are offended by perspective itself and are upset by perspective itself, perspective can be very healing and very valuable as well. And perspective by itself really cannot hurt anybody. Perspective by itself is literally just perspective. And this does bring us back to one thing I can say that I think might offend a lot of women especially, or a lot of people, is that one thing that women do struggle with is the male perspective a lot of the time, I've noticed. And I think that that's the most important thing a guy has to offer. Like, this is where the balance is if a woman is more dominant in a relationship, she is not really likely to like being adjusted or corrected by the guy, like in the things that he can say to her. And she doesn't really want to take that journey like of reproach. I just know the French word. It's like rapprochement. I think it exists in English too, but it's not like reproach. It's like like in French, it's rapprochement, but like it's bringing people together, right? She doesn't want the woman, like the more feminine person in a relationship doesn't really want to take that journey of sort of uniting her perspective or his perspective if it's a guy, right? But like, especially with women, at least in my experience, like it's like she doesn't want to take that, at least that's for the ease of talking about it, I'll speak about it this way. She doesn't want to take that journey of letting go of her sort of way of holding on to her perspective and going on a journey of coming together in the middle, like having understanding, considering whether she might be, wrong about something, since these are things that they're not really right or wrong about necessarily, like domestic kind of stuff. But it's like she might default to being what a man would consider to be unreasonable, because like women can be a lot less relaxed than men on a certain level, which is hard to describe because there are men who are like little wound up balls of like asshole anger and shit like that, right? But there are women who like she sort of creates this aura of how things are supposed to be, basically, and it seems so reasonable to her. The man like not really fitting into that picture is like somewhat intolerable to her, She's like, no, like, no, we can't talk about this. It's, it's like, I don't want to know how you really think or how you really feel or who you really are. I want you to match what I want, and that's all that there is to it. And so like the male perspective might be like less sort of valued in that sense. But now that I've said that, I'm not even sure those two sorts of people really belong together anyway. If there's people who feel like that, like, I don't know, that's sort of a very contentious kind of relationship potentially. Like, I hate the idea of anybody like, running the show in a relationship. I think that's a bad thing, and that's a sign that a relationship is not really like right for those people. I mean, it could be like sometimes a guy needs a bunch of adjustment. Like maybe he's really lazy or something like that, or really indulgent, or whatever, and like a woman can help him like stop being that way and try to want something and go be ambitious to some degree, at least a little bit, in the world or whatever it is. But the point that I'm making is like, hey, let's say that these are upsetting thoughts to you, right? I don't know who you are, but let's say that I've said upsetting things just now, right? Like that is a reflection of that energy. I'm just saying things. I'm just musing about stuff. I'm just thinking about things. And that's how I think, like, especially with men, like that's an important process where you just kind of muse openly, you go over things, and you have this polarity in your perspective, which is you are able to entertain what people would consider kind of the worst perspective, and you're also able to entertain better things. And you may be so resistant to the whole like affair that nobody could ever really convince you differently. So like here might be me, and I just have these like perspectives a lot of people would consider abhorrent or outdated or like too old fashioned or too like narrow or something like that. I don't know. Like I'm not a narrow person. I'm not somebody who sees the world in black and white. But I do have thoughts on gender and how these things work that are just musings because nobody knows. Like nobody really knows how everything works. Nobody knows how all this stuff works, how the heart works, how thoughts work, how feelings work. It's a mystery to everybody. And so if somebody's going around like saying, I have the answers of how to be and what's right and how to think and feel and see things, it's like that person's not going to be allowing perspective into their space. And that's bad. Like, it's, sort of, maybe not. Like, sometimes it depends on the person, right? Like, there are some women out there who are going to be like, oh yeah, I know if I got in a relationship with her that I could never express my true thoughts and feelings, And you might be like, well, that sounds like a bad relationship, but I was just saying a few minutes ago that it is, right? But on another level, if you know that going into it, you're like, I'll never be able to express my true thoughts and feelings, but I do love her and I do want to be in that relationship and I'm willing to sacrifice like all the other stuff that matters to me. It's like, I've had enough of life up to this point. I don't need those things anymore. I can be with her. Then, like that, I don't know whether to say that's a bad thing or a good thing, but if you really truly know what you're doing, you can be that person. And actually what you'd probably see happen then is if you're with her and you're present in that way and you just adore her and you're like, I'm gonna be the guy that she wants me to be and I don't care. Like, she doesn't need to hear all my stupid thoughts about everything and like I'm willing to give up like all the the truths that I have that I would share with other men. Like, I'm just willing to give up all those things because I know they'd rub her the wrong way because her heart is not set like that. Like, a very feminine heart especially is just not set to, like, enjoy extreme amounts of conflict, Or to enjoy just like how critical and sort of disrobing the male mind can be. Like the male mind can definitely be something that just tears down everything that isn't it. And even then, it's only doing that because if you're truly in that very male energy, you want to be torn down. You want everything to try and tear you down. You're like, come on, bring it. Like, I'm here and I'm ready for it, right? I'll fight you. And so everything is a contest. Like with men at that level, everything is a contest between you and the men in your life, where you're tearing each other down, you're lifting each other up in the sense of going, hey, be stronger, be tougher. And so it's a complete dissembling of the psyche. And then you put that next to the feminine, and that's not fun for her. Like, she doesn't want that. She doesn't want to be torn down. And this is where a lot of bad or difficult relationship dynamics come up, is the guy might be too playful for the woman, and she doesn't, like, he doesn't realize that she's playing with him from time to time on his level, and maybe even kind of likes that, like kind of likes being one of the guys. But what she really wants is to be heart connected. She wants to adore him, and she wants him to spend all sorts of heart-connected moments with her. That the real true fun of being with her is in the heart. It's not in the playfulness, the back and forth, the camaraderie or bravado that he might have with his male friends. And so that's why men can say something that ends up hurting a woman's feelings a lot of the times, is because she doesn't feel like super desirable or super wanted or super loved if he is too playful with her at the wrong moments, in the wrong way, at the wrong times. And that's why women seem very mysterious to men a lot of the time. And it's like, oh, I hurt her feelings, I don't know why, and all this stuff. And it's like, well, fundamentally, if you really love a woman, it's basically like committing yourself to an eternal tea party with this person. And she's got her little dolls and her cups, and like she's gonna play a little piano for the guests at the tea party or whatever, and there's the setting and the mood and the feeling and all that. And like that's where you always are after that point. You're always at the wedding. You're never away from the wedding after that point. You just live in the wedding, and you live in the tea party, and you live in the garden, and she's not leaving, and she loves you. She has everything she wants there, and you have to be there too. That's it. That's what it is.